Yes, can we start, ma'am? She's not found on the screen. Has she left? So, ma'am, can we start with your permission? Can we start, ma'am? Ma'am, please unmute. Please unmute.
Not, yeah, now I got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was not able to unmute myself and I just got bumped off.
Okay.
For some reason. I'm sorry about that. Yes, sir,
It's
please.
fine. So we can start now. Okay.
Yes, sir.
So good morning, friends. I welcome you all to this 7th day of the UGC sponsored Human Resources Center Development Center organized refresher course in English on the topic literature, culture and technology, mediations and intersections, being organized by Rashtrasant Tukaroji Maharaj, Nagpur University, Nagpur. Friends, the resource person for the session, we have Dr. Somani Gupta. Ma'am is professor in the Government Autonomous College of Durg and years of teaching experience. Ma'am is associated with training and coaching since 1990. Ma'am has many accreditations to her credit. She is a certified human process facilitator, then certified executive coach for coaching and leadership. Then she is a trainer of EMT, entrepreneurial motivational training, and a few more additions to her credit. She has a research award. She has been awarded for research by UGC on the topic youth anxiety and stress within the higher education system. Then she has one minor research to her credit. She has completed 2 awareness campaigns in solid waste management, which have been sponsored by the Ministry of Environment and Forest. Presently, ma'am is working on learner beliefs and teacher beliefs in learning English as a second language, a socio-cultural approach to comparison of learner beliefs in India and Serbia. So it's an international project, and she has published number of research articles in national and international journals, has the copyrights of 2 edited books, and has published 1 as a single author. She has also delivered keynote addresses in number of international conferences. So the topic of the session that ma'am would be presenting. Please mute your mics. The topic that ma'am would be presenting is understanding Kalapani Diaspora. So on behalf of the participants and Nagpur University, I welcome ma'am to this session and hand over the mic to her for her presentation. So over to you, ma'am.
First of all, thank you, sir. Thank you so much for your introduction. It's really always nice to hear about oneself from someone else. So I was delighted from you what I've done so far. The second is thank you for inviting me for this session. I again enjoy talking to youngsters, talking to people from the fraternity, and it enriches me. It enriches me in terms of finding a new wisdom to what, or a new knowledge to what I have said or what I have presented. Mr. George, could you mute yourself, please? So, like I said, you know, when we talk about collective wisdom, this is a kind of the collective know-hows that start to happen, because I cannot profess to have read everything or thought about all the aspects, just as the writers that I read must not have looked into the various facets of any particular topic. So whenever there is an opportunity to interact, to be amongst people from the fraternity, I never lose a chance. So I thank you, Sir Kapil sir, for inviting me. I also thank my dear friend, Dr. Prantik Banerjee, for reaching out to me for this program and giving me this opportunity, let us say, to be here with you today. And the topic that I chose was just something that came to me. There were two topics that I was kind of juggling with, and this was more aligned to the topic of your refresher course. So this is what we decided on later to do. Now, if I kind of confess, my whole journey of research began with my refresher courses. That is where I picked up the topics which I would like to work on, was exposed to various themes, various ways of various critical theories to analyze works. In fact, my entire approach to research was decided from there. When I look into my screen right now, I can see that most of the people have already done their research. I can see Dr. Manoj Mandavi. We have been talking over the phone some time now. And of course, there are lots of doctors. There are very few people who have still not done their research. So my talk probably will interest those who are basically planning to do their research. It may also interest people who want to write new papers. Now, may I share my screen with this? Let's see if I can do it again. Here. Yes, sir. My screen is visible, sir?
Yes, ma'am. It's
perfect. So I kind of tweaked the title a little. Instead of understanding, I thought we are revisiting actually the Kalapani Diaspora. Now, the word Kalapani Diaspora together, individually might have, you might have been privy to it. You might have read it in various places, already know quite a bit about it, because diasporic literature is something that we have been discussing, we have been talking about, and doing so many researches. In fact, now most of the authors that we are working on, be it Amitav Ghosh, be it Chitra Divakaruni, are diasporic writers. Kalapani Diaspora, how is it different? And Kalapani, exactly what it means in terms of when we talk about the diasporic literature that has come up from there. And what are the new areas that we can explore is what I'm going to talk about today. So once again, dear friends, I'm Dr. Somani Gupta, and I'm basically from Durg, Chhattisgarh, and far not at all anyway connected with Kalapani. But since we are talking about diasporic literature, let us look into what is exactly diaspora. Now, and anybody wants to talk anywhere in between, please raise your hand and you can just, stop me and we can talk about it. We need not wait till the end of the session to come up with questions. If it is boiling inside you, please unmute yourself and ask. I'll be glad to answer. And in fact, we can have a discussion there itself. So, the slide will not move now when it needs to. So, okay, slideshow.
From the beginning.
So, yes. So now we are looking at what is diaspora. Now, I have picked this up from one of the books. So there is no rocket science here. This is something that you all already know, but I thought we must reiterate what we already know. So Safran, in his essays, which were written somewhere in 1991 and 1999, has defined diaspora as follows: that diasporas are expatriate communities that are dispersed from the original center to at least two peripheral places. Now, I have a certain thought about these two peripheral places, but since I was quoting him, I thought not to change it, because right now we also look at diaspora where we look at one peripheral place. So at least two peripheral places, yes. And I'm very sorry about that. I'll just switch this off. So Safran, in his essays in 1991, defines the diasporas as follows: the expatriate minority communities that are dispersed from the original center to at least two peripheral places that maintain a memory, vision, or myth about their original homeland. So when they have left the country, they already have memories of their homeland, but that memory actually then expands and many things get added, and it is almost, there is a vision and a myth surrounding what homeland is, so it always also becomes very rosy. It gets various colors that the diaspora has in its mind, that believe they are not and perhaps cannot be fully accepted by their host country, that they'll never become a part of their host country, that see the ancestral home place as a place of eventual return when time is right. We will hold the sentence while we do the lecture, and we'll come back to it at the end. This thought that the place of eventual return is very important when we look at Kalapani Diaspora, because somewhere that sense that it's never going to be back, the thought while leaving the homeland is always that we'll be back, but once they reach there, it just becomes a utopian thought that the homeland is there and we're going to go back. That are committed to the maintenance and restoration of this homeland, and they're committed somewhere in the mind to hold the homeland the way they want it to be when they return. And the group's consciousness and solidarity are importantly defined by this continuing relationship with the homeland. And the diasporic group, which is outside the country, it kind of makes a group, and the group thought is, the collective thought is that there is this relationship with the homeland, which is going to be the same as we think it is going to be. Now, when we come to the Kalapani narratives, the Kalapani literary narratives chronicle the history of the indenture and the experience of indentured Indians. Now, we all, I'm going to come to that, the history of Kalapani in my next slide. But before that, I think I should have put that slide before. The term Kalapani itself, creates the image in our mind of the cellular jails of Andaman. And the only Kalapani that I knew about before I started studying about the literature of Kalapani was that the prisoners of Indian independence were taken there, like Veer Savarkar and a few others, and who stayed there and somewhere hanged in the gallows, and some died there, and it was like Hitler's concentration camp probably, and except for the gas chambers, but the conditions were no better. And the Kalapani itself created an image of pain and suffering. The Kalapani word meant ostracism. The Kalapani word meant suffering and punishment. So there was the thought of indentured laborers that time did not come to me. It is only much later when I started reading about it that the word Kalapani meant more than just crossing the black waters, just crossing the Atlantic Ocean to go to the Andamans to be punished. So Kalapani literary narratives, as we are going to read them, we are going to understand them, chronicle the history of the indenture and the experience of the indentured Indians. These are mostly stories of survival of the past, and the past is fractured and reconfigured. Because you see, these stories are not in first person. These stories are not told by those indentured Indians who have actually gone there. It is their second, third, fourth generations of people who are writing, or people like Ghosh and others who write about them. So these people basically were mostly illiterate workers coming from the lower strata of the society. So none of them have written their own literature. So since this is not a first-hand literature, what are the various ways that we study? And what are the tropes that kind of emerge when we are studying Kalapani literature? The first trope that constantly comes up are the questions of identity, the non-belonging in diaspora in relation to India. That is another way of looking at it. Resistance to cultural assimilation, gender ideologies, sexuality, exile symptoms of migration and plantation life, and cultural memory. Now, the term Kalapani, before I come to the history of it, I must say that it is also used to define the travel across Atlantic, and it kind of encodes, the very term itself encodes within itself a dissolution and even negation of identity of the people. So just if we look at the history of Kalapani, as I said, since 1857, when the first I think in 1858 or 1857, that is when the first ship took the load full of prisoners to Andaman Islands, to the cellular jail. So in India, Kalapani is often associated with exile or punishment faced by the Indian freedom fighters at the Andaman cellular jail. When used in diaspora, it refers to the large-scale migration out of India. So after the abolition of Atlantic slavery in 1833, over 1 million Indians were transported between 1834 to 1917 across the Kalapani, the Black Waters, the Forbidden Sea between India and the Americas, to sugar colonies under the system of indentured labor in order to meet the demand for cheap, unskilled labor. and also that the rising of the need for sugar made it very important for these unskilled laborers to go and work in the sugarcane fields there. Indians were also recruited later in 19th and early 20th centuries to work in South and East Africa on the railways and other industries. It is, however, a chapter that has been conveniently ignored in Indian history. None of the history books talk about this. They're so marginalized that we don't even, so other than Gandhi, we don't know any other single Indian who has gone to South Africa. And Gandhi, of course, did not fall into the category of illiterate, indentured laborer. So what we have with us is the whole lot of our brethren who have not been recognized by our history itself. Now, why is this anathema? Why is it not right to talk about them? One, of course, is our Brahminical texts, which kind of refuse to acknowledge people who have traveled abroad unless they belonged to the elite and learned class. So the Blackwaters trope is said to derive from the long-held notions that sea crossing were antithetical to Hindu culture. No, I guess it was in UK too, when crossing the rocks of Gibraltar was seen as not done. But here also, in India, definitely we know that even Ramanujan was not allowed initially by his grandmother to go to London. So crossing the sea was very antithetical to Hindu culture, entailing a separation of the traveler from the holy Ganges, thereby breaking the reincarnation cycle and engendering the loss of caste. So a lot of religious pressure there. Scholars of ancient India have noted that a ban on sea travel is mentioned in the 5th century BC Sutra of Bodhayana, while the texts of Manu record that a Brahmin who had undertaken sea voyage was considered a sinner, without, however, specifying that the individual would lose caste and or become socially unfit. He's considered a sinner, but later on, you know, with the Brahminical thoughts and pressures coming in and the new dictums coming in, it was also considered that, yes, they are socially unfit also. They need, sinner can be purified, you know, but here it was socially outcast. And as I said before, the term Kalapani, hence, was often used to encode the dissolution and even the negation of identity. Okay, what is it that we really study when we are studying about the subaltern groups? I think this slide should have come later, and maybe we can actually talk about this a little later. Now, before actually starting with Chalo Jahaji, I want to talk about the first probably book that was written by an Indo-Fijian writer called Joginder Singh Kamal. He wrote the book in Hindi initially, called it Savera, later translated it to The Morning. So the book initially was written in 1976 and it was translated in 1991. And it was it's a collection of essays, a historically realist, it's a realist novel. That's for the form it took much later. And that's perhaps the first book that was written by somebody who came from that community of indentured laborers. Now, I have chosen 5 books to talk about. So we're going to talk about it very quickly. The 5 books are Jahajin, if you have heard about it, The Kuli Women, Viraya, Chalo Jahaji, and The Sugarcane Doctors. Now, if you take a look at it, all these books are written very recently. So what were we doing up till now? It took us almost a century to realize that we have left these people out. And in the end, I'm going to talk about another community, which has been left out by us very conveniently, and still nothing has been written about them, or their history or their life has not been mentioned. So the first book that I'm going to take up is Chalo Jahaji, written in 2000. It's on a journey through Indentured in Fiji by Brij V. Lal. Now, Brij V. Lal is one of the descendants of the indentured laborers, and hence we can say that it is, if not a first-hand chronicling or first-hand writing of a person, it is at least a second or the third person in the generation of indentured people who's writing this. So, Chalo Jahaji is a collection of essays that focuses on the Girmit experience. Now, Girmit, if the word is new, it is a term used by the for the indentured laborers. Now, these indentured laborers mostly went from Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, down south. These are the places most of them went from. The deep poverty led them to go there, go abroad and settle down there. So in fact, in Jahajin, the story is about a 110-year-old woman who speaks in fluent Bhojpuri and laments the loss of her motherland. So, and how this language, Bhojpuri, eventually is now spoken can also be a great area of study there. So Chalo Jahaji is a collection of essays that focuses on the Girmit experience in Fiji. It seeks to tell the story of 6,000 Indians who were indentured there between 1879 and 1916. Although written at different times, these essays have an intellectual coherence, thematic unity, and chronology of their own. This book contributes to the rejuvenation of the Indo-Fijian diaspora and to the ongoing conversation about the nature and meaning of the indenture experience globally. So not only it chronicles the data, it talks about the history of the people, but it is also a part of the current ongoing conversation that is going on about the experience of the indentured laborers, and it's a global conversation that's happening. Now, because the Indo-Fijian diaspora in North America, Australia, New Zealand is spreading now, there is a demand for this literature. So suddenly, why the interest? Okay, so the interest is because there is a demand. The diasporic people retrieve and represent their remembered past, and they transmit them to the next generation through different and complex ways: songs, music, ceremonies, and oral narratives. They show that at one level or the other, the Girmitias were caught between the demands and pulls of two worlds, one which they left but not completely escaped, and one which they had entered but not fully embraced. Now, this is the dilemma. This is the pain. You leave a country and yet your heart belongs there. And you reach another country and you're not able to accept it completely. So this is the pain. This is the dilemma. This is what causes the entire suffering. So now that people have moved on to the second, third, and fourth generation, it is very difficult to, recapture that pain and that suffering. And in fact, Brij V. Lal says that when you, even if a few of them would be living, they were children then and now they're very, very old, they're not keen to share their experience. They're not ready to talk about that. Whether it is because of the lack of memory, or whether there is any kind of shame or any kind of, a buildup of reluctance, because, you kind of feel that your country really hasn't done enough after independence to bring you back and settle you down. So if that is the reason why, we don't know, but he did sense he did get a sense of, reluctance in the people to talk about the experience. They had left one home and at least emotionally not found another in their own lifetime. So even if the physical disconnect with India had happened, the connection with their second home really did not happen. So I'm going to read out a quotation here, and I thought it was so acutely written that I really did not want to spoil it by kind of just talking about it. So this is about the experience of the Girmitiyas. This is about the experience of the indentured laborers who went and settled down in Fiji and other places. They lived and died in an acute state of tension and ambivalence. They were a people caught in between, neither here nor there, or else everywhere all at once. These essays will, I hope, help us understand why, by extending and deepening our knowledge of the formative years of the Indian presence in Fiji, exploring the local byways and alleys of an experience glossed over in other investigations. So there are other investigations happening, but nobody is really looking into what really went into the minds of the people who found themselves in the Novel Land. The Girmitiyas are gone now, but their imprint is etched indelibly on the landscape of the adopted homes. They were, in fact, a part of a remarkable episode in modern history, units in a grand but ultimately flawed experiment in labor service dubbed by its critics in another form of slavery. Now, many people have spoken about the Girmit experience or the indentured laborers as nothing more than slavery. But that is another, aspect, perhaps a social aspect to look at as to how they were treated. So they called it Narak, they called it hell by their own experience. So we can just imagine that people actually not from very well-to-do spaces calling that hell. So we can just imagine how bad it was. Now, the second book that I'm going to take up is it is also important to read about these experiences because they form a part of the modern history that we have neglected so far. So, very surprisingly, these people, when they meet, whether they are from Fiji or from Guyana or from Natal, Mauritius, they kind of bond very well. And their bonding is basically because somewhere in their memory, they have an experience which they have shared. There is common words and language which they use, the similarity in names, food, preferences, and what they have read and how they have been brought up. So this bonds them very close. And so the next book that I have for you, one of course is as we just read, Chalo Jahaji, and the second book that I have for you is Kuli Woman. Now, before beginning with Kuli Woman, I must tell you that I'll come to that later again, but I thought I must tell you this here, that women were far less in number in the entire journey that the laborers took. So, but as time progressed, women started traveling, whether it was by marriage, that and the Indian girls were shipped to the new land, or the wives who went with their men. But when we do a gender study, we realize that the kind of subjugated positions that these women had in this entire scope of study that we are taking up right now. So Kuli woman is the Odyssey of Indenture by Gautra Bahadur. So in 19, she talks about, again, as I said, written in 2013, but the story actually is way back in 1903, the story of a young woman who sailed from India to Guyana as a Kuli, the British name for indentured laborers, who replaced the newly emancipated slaves on sugar plantations around the world. Pregnant and traveling alone, this woman, like so many coolies, disappeared into history. In Kuli Woman, shortlisted was the novel became very famous. It was shortlisted for Orwell Prize in 2014, and her great granddaughter Gautra Bahadur embarks on a journey into the past to find her. Traversing 3 continents and trawling through countless colonial archives, Bahadur excavates not only her great-grandmother's story, but also the represented history of some quarter of 1 million other Kuli women, shining a light on their complex lives. So how many Kuli women did we have? It is the lives of the women who lived there as Kulis. They were all known as Kulis, but what was so special about these lives? So these Kuli women, you know, as the book talks about many women other than her great-grandmother, these women were either the runaway widows or outcasts or girls who just ran away to escape the sheer poverty that was there in India at that time. And of course, the other kind of fate also that was destined, we will see that in another book. Many of them left their husbands and families behind to migrate to the land of unknown, which they thought would provide much better life for them. But there was a traumatic middle passage during their journey of the sea. And what happened when they reached the new land? They only faced a life of hard labor, dismal living conditions, and especially what awaited them was complete sexual exploitation. Bahadur in her book explains that, you know, the sexuality of the women actually makes them very important in this whole study of indentured laborers, because they stand out as figures in the history, not only because they were much less in number, they were outnumbered by the men. These women were able to use sex as a tool with their overseers to gain various advantages, and you know, the act that actually led to many fatal retaliations from the Kuli men, and many uprisings that happened because of these liaisons. But the women many a times used sex as a very powerful tool. So Kuli woman is actually is a mediation on survival, and is a story of double diaspora from India to the West Indies in 1 century, Guyana to United States in the next, and you know, in a way, it's searching for one's roots. And it also talks about the exploitation of gender and power and the perils that exists in such journeys. So it's a comprehensive book. It makes a very important study in terms of the role that gender played in the lives of indentured laborers. Am I going too fast? I can see 2 people waiting in the waiting room. So
no, ma'am, no, ma'am.
Thank you, sir. So there are 2 people waiting have entered the waiting room. here. So the next book that I'm going to talk about is The Children of Sugarcane. Now, The Children of Sugarcane is written just last year, published in 2021, and again set in the backdrop of 19th century India and the British-owned sugarcane plantations of Natal. Written with great tenderness and lyricism, Children of Sugarcane paints an intimate and wrenching picture of Indentured told from a woman's perspective. Now, although Coolie Woman was also from a woman's perspective, it was the great-great-great-granddaughter who was writing about a search of her Coolie grandmother. This is almost like a first-hand narrative, and it's a story of Shanti who moves to South Africa through marriage, hoping to escape the troubling fate of young girls that the young girls have in India. Pardon, I have missed out a few words because, in a hurry. So this is the sugarcane, Children of Sugarcane. But you have to understand that, there is a rising demand for sugar world over, especially with the chocolate factories and the candies and all kinds of sugar products that we have. I can hear people. Can you unmute yourself? Can you mute yourself, please? Thank you. Okay. Okay. Why can't I minimize this? Right. Okay. Now, little bit of the story of Children of Sugarcane. Shanti, a bright teenager, stifled by the life of rural India and facing an arranged marriage, dreams that South Africa is the opportunity to start afresh. The colony of Natal is where Shanti believes she can escape poverty, caste, and troubling fate of the young girls in her village. Months later, after the harrowing sea voyage, she arrives in Natal only to discover the profound hardship and slave labor that awaits her. S1. Okay. Spanning 4 decades and 2 continents, Children of Sugarcane demonstrates the life-giving power of love, heartache, and the indestructible bonds between family and friends. These bonds prompt heroism and sacrifice, the final act which leads to Shanti's redemption. Before coming to Jahajan, I just want to talk a little. Now, the question that came to me when I was reading this is, why? Why did this whole concept of having a better life abroad has happened? So the British Empire here played a very important role. So, so on one hand, they created this entire suppressing environment in India. And of course, the Indian own social systems did not do anything to refute that or kind of give a space for women, a place of respect for women. They were equally harsh. So they created an opportunity. The British government created an opportunity for the women of India to travel to Natal and other places. So one, the women saw that there was an opportunity to get out of this, where they either had to marry a dying man just for the sake of marriage or die in the pyre of a husband in forms of sati. So they saw that they could escape to another place. And for them at that point in time, this place was anyways better. The new place would be anyways better than the place they were in. That was the kind of thought that occurred to them. Dreams of a better life and an opportunity to save money and return to the village as a success story was something that they had in their minds. So but in reality, I think not many of them returned home. And in fact, when they returned back with much less than what they had started with. So, and neither were people. This whole travel, if you look at it, travel always is changing people. That we have seen. Even if you study Shakespeare, you will see that travel is a very important symbol of change and how we kind of evolve. So they were not caste, they had transgressed caste, their parents had died while they were away. So when they come back, and in fact, few of them did come back, they found that the colonial grip was even further tight. So the homeland that was there in their mind was no longer the homeland that they had left or they had imagined existed. So they came to the realization that perhaps the place they had been exiled was their home right now. So that realization was very painful. And I just want to read out one of the thoughts that I have noted. So one of the characters, it says, where do we go when it falls apart in our hands and we are left with less than we started with? Begin again.
She has.
Can you please mute the mic? So where do we go when it falls apart in our hands and we are left with less than we started with? Begin again. And with what? And so many made a return journey to Africa to begin anew. So in fact, they went back to start all over again because their homeland was not the homeland they had left or thought that actually existed. I next come to the book called Jahajin. Jahajin was the first book that I read on Kalapani Diaspora, actually. So Jahajin actually takes us to the extraordinary experience of a journey of the Girmitias from Calcutta to Trinidad, crossing. Now, this is actually the description that is given with the book. So it's not that you will not find it anywhere. Crossing 2 oceans to reach their new homes on the other side of the world. The Girmitias, undergo a lot of travel. So from Faizabad to Calcutta by train, passing down the Hooghly, then a 3-month voyage around the stormy Cape up to the Atlantic to Trinidad. Weary and tired, they settled down as indentured laborers on the sugar estates. They called it Chinidad, actually. The novel opens with a narrator, a young linguist, talking to 110-year-old Dida, who came to Caribbean on the same ship as her great-grandmother. Dida speaks of leaving her village in Basti with her son and sailing across the seas to Chinidad, the land of sugar, and about the life and friendship she built on estate. Dida's stories of a lost world captivate the younger woman, encouraging her to make the journey back across the Kalapani. Alive with compelling characters and a tilt of Trinidad Bhojpuri, Jahajin gathers up various narratives of relocation and transformation across a century in a tale that is part of history and part of fairy tale. Now, there are 2 journeys here. One, of course, is the journey of leaving the homeland, and the other is return back to the homeland. And if one has to understand the trauma, the memory of the characters, then one has to, understand both the journey to and the journey flow. I mean, going to and coming back. So the last book that I'm going to take up is Viraya. Again, this is written by a descendant of one of the laborers. So 13 lakh, that is 1.3 million Indians were shipped as indentured laborers to sugarcane plantations in British colonies to replace slaves. My great-grandfather was one of them. This is his story. So this is the story of Viraya. And so in this book, he writes about that how slavery was abolished in the British Empire in 1835. The demand for sugar was exploding, with people consuming increasing amounts of sugar in chocolates, tea, and sweets. The growing First World War sugar industry of the late 1800s, 1.3 million Indians were shipped. The indenture system was not too different from slavery. And this book is about the search of my great-grandfather and the story of Indian indenture. So both these two books talk about Kuli women and Viraya. They talk about search for their great-grandfather. So there is one search here, the search for own identity. The children of the indentured laborers, they're searching for their own identity by searching for their grandmother, their great-grandmother, or their grandfather, like Bridgeshaw, talking about, kind of giving respect to his own father and great-grandfather. And the other is the search that the Girmitias themselves took. So there is a generation gap between the two searches, and it makes a very interesting study to see how the new generation actually looks at the older generation and translates their pain and their suffering into the pen and paper. So how did these Indian communities, now you have to understand that these people were perhaps the first people who went abroad and settled down. So the first diasporic community were formed by these people, the Girmitias. They were the original people who settled down abroad from India. So leaving aside questions of exploitation, racism, and institutional aspects of indenture, I think that indenture experience is very important, formative and defining period of the history of overseas Indian communities, particularly in Caribbean, Mauritius, South Africa, and Fiji, because that is the site of the initial social transformation. Fundamental, we must actually look at later diasporic literature. When the old world meets new, then old ways of doing things, old values and institutions start to change. We begin to confront the reality of a completely different social order when the former ways of doing things, the worldview, seem to lose their relevance. So somewhere things have changed. We are no longer, even the great-grandchildren of the Girmitias are not acting or thinking the way those people had. For them, it is just recapturing the history. So, but that does not mean that, we should move ahead and forget the relevance of that old period. Now, the leveling. I think I'll go to this slide first, okay, and then I'll come back there. So there are three symbols that predominantly stand out in the study of indentured labor: the sea, the ship, and the land. Caught between neither here nor there, the ship played a pivotal role in bonding the people from different parts of India. Now, this was essentially the place of male bonding, if I may say so. So, the people, whether they came from South India or they came from Bihar or they came from North India, they all bonded together in this ship and they all became Jahaji Bhais. And these Jahaji Bhais actually took care of each other in ways they could. The women, of course, in the Jahaj, nobody has spoken about the women in the ship. It is only much later when Kuli Woman was written and um, books like The Children of Sugarcane came up, that we start talking about people like Shanti who traveled. The earthly experience of Narak was as Fijian, as South African, as it was Caribbean. So everywhere, the whole experience of traveling to this new land was like going to Narak, going to hell. Over the years, these diasporic Indians have developed a spirit of resilience and inventiveness which mark them as different from their continental cousins. So now definitely there is because of the experience, there is a different identity that this group has. Like the precarious transoceanic crossing themselves, this literature has experienced its own tenuousness determined by its rural working class positionality and the trauma of Kalapani. Now, this has not been held as high literature. Just like the people itself, the literature also has had a very traumatic journey and finding its position in the literature today. Coming back to what happened while they were there in these ships. Everyone has the same identity. They are all coolies. They're all huddled together on the estate line and cramped quarters. So everybody is equal in their denial of their individual humanity. The indenture experience was a great leveler of hierarchy and status. The details of it may vary from colony to colony, but the process was the same everywhere. Now, this entire identity of the Girmitias came across very late. There was very late attention given to this, both by the historians and by the writers, or by their own descendants. The sad part is that these people were seen only as a problem. To the missionaries, their religion was a problem to be resolved through conversion, a project undertaken to various degrees and to various levels of success in different colonies. So just convert them, make them Christians, and they're done. So the problem is solved. So we don't have to worry about which religion they belong to. To the Friends of India, around the turn of the century, the Girmitias and their flights were a blot on the face of India's struggle to find its rightful place in the international community of nations. So the Friends of India also did not talk about them. At the same time of Indian independence, overseas Indians were seen as a problem in imperial relations. Still later, they were viewed as a problem in plural societies to be solved through expulsion or political repression or enforced assimilation. So poor people here, they never got the respect that is due to any marginalized section. So talking about marginalization, they were doubly marginalized. Why revisiting the Kalapani? So the reason is that even if history of crossing the Kalapani has been well researched, this has been done mostly from the point of view of the countries where the indentured laborers went and settled. So we look at them, what happened there. We never connect them with India and think about, from this perspective, they travel and they're coming back. It has not been the focus of interest in India itself. Few scholars write about this movement from the perspective of India. We also need to move away from the thought that Kalapani actually only means cellular jail and the British Raj and the Andamans. So Kalapani, crossing the black waters, is also about people going out as laborers. Keeping the transnational perspective, the history and literature of Kalapani can be explored from the Indian perspective, going against the notion that revisiting Kalapani would be distorting Indian historiography. We have formed a history, we are comfortable with it. Now suddenly bringing this in is actually quite shameful that we have not done anything about it. So, but we still need to do it. As researchers, we need to talk about this. We need to write about this. without having the fear that it's going to spoil the historiography of India. It is important to understand the impact of reclaiming this history on present-day relationship between India and its diaspora. This will lead us to rethink notions of Indianness. Now, like I said, these are not first-hand voices that we are going to read. They are going to be third-hand, fourth-hand, fifth-hand voices, probably. Because the people who actually went there did not even know how to read and write. Even, they would mark X instead of their signatures. These stories of indentures are full of drama and tragedy, raising issues which find resonance in other places and historical contexts, in stories of oppression and marginalization. I have written chit enclaves. We'll come back to that later because this is, again, important. So let me finish this and I'll come back to chit enclaves if there is time. So in order to understand Indian histories, the legacies of Indian indenture in the Caribbean, South African, Mauritius, and Fiji, and how they still imbue our present must be retrieved and studied. It is very surprising that this part of the history is better known outside of India than within India. But yet, why do we need to shine a torch there now? A history that was almost made invisible in the history books. Why are we looking into, why are we focusing there? So if you look at the modern times, nowadays, the success stories of the new diaspora are being foregrounded and celebrated. So anybody, any Indian going abroad, making it big, be it Satya Nadella, be it anybody, we kind of talk about it. But the old diaspora is being swept under the carpet. So what do we stand to gain from resurrecting these histories in the early 21st century and from shifting our perspectives? And researchers of world history, especially labor history, literature, colonial studies, cultural studies, diaspora studies, all these histories, and sociology, social anthropology, Indian Ocean studies, South Asian studies, will find it very valuable, to make a study of these areas. Now, up till now, what have we studied? I'll just take you back to a previous slide. So far, the way we have focused on these books is how do these subaltern groups, which are so powerless and isolated, cope with the demands and expectations of the dominant groups? How is it and what ways does an immigrant community, illiterate and leaderless, cut off from its source and cooped up in a hostile environment, reconstitute itself from the surviving fragments of culture and memory? How does it rebuild itself? I had said, the study is about how they rebuild themselves. They're completely broken, neither here nor there. So how do they, build up their own identity now? How does the memory play itself out in the construction of the new community? So the role of memory also, that is something that we are looking at. So these are a few questions that we have. And coming back here, these are the perspectives that we have been studying with, but it would be very, very interesting to look at, more ways of looking at this diaspora, comparing it with the way we look at the new diaspora, the shipping of unskilled laborers to the shipping of skilled laborers, body shopping in both the cases. How is it that we continue to study the indentured fiction, the fiction of written around the indentured lives of indentured laborers? There is another group of people, as I wrote there, chit enclaves. If you are interested, then we can look at that also. In 2015, there were some 116 portions of land that got transferred between Bangladesh and India And in fact, the history says that these portions of land were lost while playing a game of chess between the two kings of Kuch Bihar and the Nawab of that area. And they lost pieces of land. And when India gained freedom, the land still, continued to have Bangladesh identity, and the lands in Bangladesh still had the Indian identity. So the people here actually belong to the nowhere land, and they still don't. And nobody mentions them in any of the works. Nobody writes about them. Their language is different. It's not purely Bangla. It's not purely the kind of Bangladeshi language that people out there speak. And even while they are within India, they have to travel with their passport. So recently, while that has been taken away, that has been resolved, not taken away, that has been resolved. They have been given the full status of Indians, but they continue to remain as a very secluded group, forming their own identity and refusing to merge or mix with the people of West Bengal at large. So this changing identity of theirs has not yet found mention in any of the works of any writers so far. They are completely not spoken about, and probably we'll be taking quite a few years again to talk about them or write something about them and understand their plight. So my focus is never just to read literature from the perspective of doing it as a part of literature, but a kind of approach that is, let's call it a socio-literary approach. And with that thought, I would end. I think I have almost taken up more than an hour. So thank you so much for this opportunity, and any questions I would be very happy to take up. We have time for questions. So if I may stop sharing my screen. Yes.
Hello, ma'am. I'm
Yes.
Suman Keswani. I would just like to tell you something, that my sister's in-laws have migrated from Bihar to Mauritius.
Oh.
And like years back. So maybe they have that proper Gurmit experience. So just now I realized that I have so much of like that in my home only, but and I didn't realize it till now. So I'll ask my sister to just give me some details regarding their journey and their family back in Bihar and all. So thank you, ma'am, because I got a new idea. This I can explore.
Yes, and probably we'll be looking at the next book coming from you, madam.
And ma'am, I want to tell you one thing more, that my in-laws, I'm a Bengali married to a Sindhi. So they have migrated from Pakistan.
So migration does play a very important role.
So I have seen two diasporas, one from that side, from the north, and now to Mauritius. So two are there in my family.
Perfect. Perfect. You're just the right person. Then yes. To be writing about this.
Yes, so I'll explore this angle and write about this. Thank you, ma'am.
Lovely. Yes, any other questions? Or any thoughts? I mean, we can just have a thought. It was lovely to hear from Dr. Suman Keswani. It was nice. So anybody else wants to share anything, I would love to hear that. And
Hello, ma'am.
Yes, sir.
Ma'am, I'm Mahendra Sahare.
Yes.
Ma'am, I would like to know one thing. As an indentured laborers, people from different parts of India, that is south, north, northeast, and many parts of India, they travel to different countries, different parts of the world as an indentured laborers. They carried baggage of their identities, just like caste, that is language identity, Tamil and Bengali, Bhojpuri, Bihari. Then, when these people settled in those host countries, then what? How did they assimilated with the native society, the native culture of the particular country? Did they assimilated or negotiated, or they formed a different kind of identity? And how can we define their identity as a hybrid identity or any other? Did they shed of their caste identity, especially? We say in our Marathi, "जी जात नाही ती जात." Caste is always there, stuck to that person from his birth to
Yes.
death.
Yes.
Then, what is that phenomena? I want to know. You are quite, you have given quite insightful lecture and authority in that area. Please.
Thank you, sir. I think this is a wonderful, wonderful question. Actually, how does one form one's identity? Especially, you're so right that in India we are so stuck with the identity of caste that immediately when you hear a surname, you try to put that person on a particular caste. You know, oh, that person's surname is this, must be belonging to this particular caste. Even now, today, we tend to do that. Now, you have to remember that most of the people who left the country as laborers were from the lower caste. They were very poor, extremely poor. So one was poverty. Second was lower caste. And coming from the various places of India, Jahaj, the ship, became the place of actually mixing them all up and leveling them out. So maybe one was a little of the higher caste, one was a little from the lower caste, but Jahaj leveled them because they were all put on similar conditions, you know, same barracks, same kind of work. The Jahaj did not look at them, the ship did not look at them in terms of caste. They were just one body with two hands who could do some labor. That was all that was assigned to them in terms of identity. Now, when they reached the land where they were supposed to work, did they try to merge with the local community? There was no chance. It was a relationship between a master and a slave. And this is where the struggle started to happen when the women started exploiting their sexuality to mix with the higher castes, the masters, and there was this rebelliousness happening with their own men and their masters. There was a struggle and fight because are you trying to rise up there, have the children of the masters, you know, the bastard children that came out of those liaisons. Now, coming back to their homeland again meant going back to the same caste identity that they belonged to. And some of them did come back, but did they come back to the land just because they came back from, say, South Africa or Fiji and they came back with a little money? Was their position any better? Unfortunately, no. It was worse. They were not only seen as sinners, they were seen as outcasts. See, even if it's a lower caste that has a caste boundary. So they were not invited into that lower caste boundary within that. They were seen as outcasts and they did not find what they had hoped they would. They thought that they would come back, find a better life, back to their own country, settle down here. Even that did not happen. So they were left neither there nor here. In fact, so much so that they went back again, back to the country of exile, and they realized that this, you use the term, very wonderful term, hybrid identity. And they used, this is the new identity that got formed for them once they went back. So, and now when their generations are writing about them, they are actually looking at this hybrid identity of theirs. They're unable to understand. In fact, they all have possessed that hybrid identity. Does that answer your question, or we can continue with the discussion?
Yeah, ma'am. I read Sea of Poppies by Amitav Ghosh.
Yeah.
There it is a very rich narrative, creating a picture of assimilation of different identities, caste identities, class identities. Even there was a Raja with them who was sent in exile. And other people from different startup society, they had different stories of their ostracization. So some women were just abandoned by their husbands, and some were from funeral fire, pulled out from the funeral fire.
Yes.
They were called themselves as Jahaj Bahans and Jahaj Bhais.
Jahaj Bhais.
Yeah. And when they reached at their, there was a revolt, and then they reached at the host country where they settled. Then they retained their identities as such, and they had no opportunity to come back to their motherland.
Yes.
And they were trying to negotiate with the local communities and finding their jobs and work there. And some people just settled there and even arranged their marriage in between their caste and communities. And some new kind of society, that is, we can say casteless or hybrid society arose there. And I think that would be a more egalitarian society we can hope for.
So I think now this is my personal take on this. I think egalitarianism is a very utopian thought. It does not exist in human beings. We do not know how to live equally. So there is always a power struggle. So there would never be an egalitarian society.
in our motherland, ma'am, we are in our inbox identities. There are strict borders of caste. Then there are subcaste also. Even some people are not allowed to marry, just fixed marriages in subcaste also.
Yeah.
But if we cross the borders or geographical borders, political and all other borders, then when Tamilian or any other person, Maharashtrian and Gujarati people, they go to different country, then they come together as Indians. Then as per their
Sir, I'll share my personal experience with you. That I have found personally, because my husband is staying abroad 15 years now. So, I've been there in and out. So I've stayed as an expat. And the expat community and the diasporic communities are different. The expatriate, they are not synonymous words. The mindsets are different. So the sense of hopelessness that when we talk about the diasporic community, back then, we are talking about the indentured, the Girmitiyas. The sense of hopelessness, the sense of having a loss, the sense of never being able to come back and join with your own community cannot be compared to people going abroad for a better life and knowing very well that once they come back to their own country, they will only be lauded. They will only be seen as somebody who has, come back for a few, if they come back and stay here, oh, wow, how could you leave US and come and stay in India? I mean, what is it that makes you leave, all the benefits that is provided abroad and come and stay and suffer in India? Because India now becomes a land of suffering because no amenities, no facilities that abroad provides. It is not seen as this person's love for motherland, homeland, nothing. So this entire journey back and forth is very different than the entire journey back and forth by these people. Theirs was a real struggle, not finding a place anywhere. And here we are talking, I mean, unfortunately, in both the cases, the term body shopping is used. In fact, there are plenty of body shoppers who look for skilled people who would go and do work there. But those were unskilled laborers who could be treated as slaves. And today we are taking the skilled people outside, giving them the best of conditions out there, even if it's not there, thinking that they're doing us a great favor by coming back to India, keeping them here. So the entire relationship is very different.
One more thing I observed, ma'am, while studying this diasporic literature, people who are from elite classes and who are privileged class in India, when they migrate to the West, and West have their Eurocentric narratives and some kind of different attitude towards Asians. And these Girmitiyas or indentured laborers who travel to another country and settle there, these people assimilated and negotiated their identities, their culture, and they settled there easily compared to the people who were the privileged class in India. Because what happened, I think privileged class, they found difficult to assimilate in American or in British society, because they wanted some kind of identity, privilege status. And that is why there was some psychological and identity crisis, cultural crisis there they experienced. And that is what reflected in diasporic literature. But here,
I think it's unfair to be generic about the privileged class and how they settled or how they found their identity. I mean, to be very honest, if you read Chitra Divakaruni or if you read even Ghosh for that matter,
Bharati Mukherjee,
but it is difficult to be so generic about them, because quite a few of them have happily adopted to whatever came, because over the period of time, the privileged class here, see, if you look at it now, the privileged class, really, it doesn't matter. We are all in the same boat.
now, in regarding the third generation of diaspora, third generation of migrants, that is IT workforce, and it is now after 2000 and 2010. That generation is easily assimilating and they are easily embracing that culture.
Correct.
And they are now very much comfortable with their what can we say, negotiated or compromised identities. They are not forcing their identities and they are not much just sticking to their strict identities.
Right.
But before that, the second generation diaspora, these people were quite aware about their identities and their cultural identity, you can say. And that is why they got to some kind of frustration. Even we see the characters from Bharati Mukherjee, Chitra Divakaruni, and many other authors, they are frustrated. and they had some before. Initially, they had some kind of problems, crisis in their lives. And if we see these indentured laborers, they are force kind of diaspora, force migrants, and because of these forced conditions, they had to migrate from their motherland, and that is why they had no other choice but to negotiate and but to just embrace that host culture, host society. I think so. That is my
Mm,
observation.
yes, but if you read more carefully, you will find because especially Brijlal's book and also Kuli Woman, people went out of choice. There was no force per se. People went because they thought that since there was no food, no money, bad life, caste system, no work in the fields either, they would have a better life working in the fields out in the sugarcane fields in Fiji or in Natal or wherever. Now, choice was there. It was not forced transportation. They were not shackled. They were not, forcibly picked up. They went by choice, thinking that they're going to have a better life.
There are many examples that from Bihar and Bengal. Out of utter poverty, parents sold their children. Now,
Yeah.
in our Maharashtra, in Nashik and around that place, because of poverty and because of deprivation, parents are selling their children. That happened in that period also.
Yes.
So where do children are ready to leave their parents, leave their motherland, and other things? They had to leave, and they had to bound to that contract and had to migrate to.
Yeah, in fact, Jahajin, in Peggy Mohan's Jahajin, we exactly talk about 110-year-old Dida, who was just 10-year-old when she travels in the ship. So yeah, she did not have a choice. She did not have much say in that matter. She just went with her grandmother. Okay. So how much of force was applied? And that is why I say the first-hand narrative we don't have. We only have stories being retold. So that would make a very interesting area of study again, as I would say.
There
Please
are
do
different
take
layers of meaning and themes.
layers and
so
layers
we
of
can say we
meaning.
have to explore those.
And
Thank you,
how
ma'am.
much. Okay. So thank you. Thank you for engaging. It was very nice talking to you, sir.
Thank you, ma'am.
So, Mr. Kapil Singhal, I think we are
Okay. At the end,
reaching nearly its time, and I don't know whether there are any more questions. So,
well, any more questions?
if no, then
As ma'am, I invite Professor Shende from Wardha to propose the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Kapil Singhal, for giving me this opportunity of vote of thanks. So, on behalf of HRDC, RTMNU University, Nagpur, I am Milind Shishrav Shende, feel privileged to propose vote of thanks, Dr. Somani Gupta, Madam, for thought-provoking, informative, and learners-friendly lecture on the topic Revisiting Kalapani Diaspora. Thank you so much, ma'am, for delivering such a wonderful lecture over here. Actually, it is the topic which was still uncharted by, and you discovered that topic and took us to that journey of this new topic of research or area of research. So I again thank the coordinator of this refresher course or this session, Dr. Kapil Singhal, sir. I'm also thankful to Dr. Dharmik ma'am, and definitely thanks to all the participants who were quite attentive during the lecture and heard you very carefully. I also extend my gratitude to all those who have directly or indirectly helped in the smooth function.
It got muted.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, sir. I think you got muted.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So thank you once again, Kapil sir. And
Yeah,
I
it's
don't
a
know if
pleasure,
everybody
ma'am.
can hear.
Yeah,
So
Yeah.
thank you again very much. And if you permit me, may I leave?
yeah, ma'am.
I
Yeah,
think
you may
it's
leave,
time.
ma'am.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. And participants, you have a long, you have to attend extra 1 hour today, as we have a webinar again by the university, which will be from 4 to 5. All of you must have registered by now. If you haven't, please do that and be prepared to remain engaged today till 5 o'clock in the evening. Okay, so we'll meet
Sir,
again for the next session. Yeah,
sir, it is the same link na, that UGC, HRDC, and Nagpur University is going to be there.
no. I think Dharmik ma'am has shared the link. I'll do that for you. She
Yes,
shared
sir.
it. Yeah, the other day she had shared.
Okay,
I'll
sir.
do it again. I'll do that again. Yeah.
Sir, holistic development, something that was the topic of the university's webinar.
Yeah, and this is some about Indian. Achha, that was the earlier one. I don't remember
Okay.
this topic. Yeah, but from
Sir,
4,
please share it.
the participants have to be there. Okay. Yeah, I will share. Right now I'll do that. Okay.